background view from the hospital executive, Brian Lang. I want to introduce him as the moderator here. A lot of you probably know Brian. He's very passionate about this space. And just recently, he's focused on the next phase of energizing health in 2015. So, and then together with the Kaufman staff, they're going to spin it off as a standalone entity to help digital health startups and hospitals work together. But you can probably also see him as being a producer of many Health 2.0 or events and different things at South by Southwest, and he's been a head coach. He's also been a producer of a lot of events there, and he really is very, very passionate and knowledgeable about this space. So thank you, Brian. I hand it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, but we'd like to invite you to join us in a conversation that we've been having over the past year, and I would like to extend into next year around how hospitals and digital health startups work together. So I'd like to let our panelists introduce themselves, and I'd like to give you a little context for the conversation we've been having about this juxtaposition of how hospitals and digital health companies work together. But if you don't mind starting?
Sure. My name is Craig Joseph. I'm a pediatrician. I practiced primary care peds for 8 years before moving to the dark side and working for a small EHR software company in Madison, Wisconsin. And spent a number of years there. Went out in the real world, became the Chief Medical Information Officer for a Cerner hospital system, and now I'm at Texas Children's, helping them with their EHR and other fun things.
That little company was called Ever?
That's the name of that company.
So my name is James Jury. I'm Director of Finance at Texas Children's Hospital, and in a group, a little unknown named group called Business Development and Planning. So I look at top-line growth throughout the hospital, be it models such as urgent care centers or specialty clinics, or also most of my time is spent on commercialization. So I lead our efforts to determine good ideas on our campus that develop into some kind of proof of concept work, or into a startup company, or into a license. And I work with Baylor College of Medicine often on that area. But also within the pediatric community, the pediatric hospitals have decided that we want to kind of lower the cost of this entire process. And so we are forming kind of a group, a connectivity group of 30 hospitals in the pediatric space that are working together, that are in essence trying to prevent duplication and prevent a space that in essence kind of crosses itself. We want to encourage more activity in the space by partnering early on and increasing the chance of success for each of the opportunities that we try to identify as areas of need. So into that area, I get a broad space. So we're a health plan. We have the pediatric practices, we have the inpatient facilities and the outpatient facilities. So if there's something that helps kids, I can look at it and try to find a way to make that more successful.
So my name is Jim Graham. I'm the Associate Director of the Innovation Institute at TMC here in Houston. So my healthcare career started at McKinsey in Boston. I was there for 5 years serving large pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device companies on a range of issues. After that, I was in Austin, Texas at Sante Ventures, where we did early stage life science investing. Again, across the spectrum of healthcare, so everything from medical devices to digital health, healthcare IT, and therapeutics, biologics and pharmaceuticals. I joined the TMC a little over a month ago, and the Innovation Institute at TMC is really focused on helping bridge the gap between great ideas coming out of this area and out of the TMC member institutions, and helping guide those towards the commercial path. So I think we're really excited about all the activity going on. We'll talk more about how we can actually make that real.
Great. Thank you very much, guys. So let me tell you a little bit about the dialogue we've been having locally and nationally over the last year. The Kaufman Foundation came up with a series of grants for 4 cities throughout the U.S. this past year around hooking up early-stage digital health companies with hospitals. And it's the series of events started in Boston at MIT, went on to Philadelphia, arrived in Houston, and then landed in Kansas City, where Kaufman calls its home. And each city had a budget and broad parameters of, take what's in your city that's unique and put together an event for us that we can chart over 3 years, the results of we can chart over 3 years, that shows us how hospitals and early-stage digital health companies can collaborate. So in Houston, what we did is we worked with folks like Jeff Fried and Andy Anderson on patient portals. We worked with Pat McGinnis, who's in the back, on patient safety, Maura Herman. We worked with James at Texas Children's on population health management. We worked with Phil Beckett from Greater Houston Health Connect on care coordination. And then we worked with Dorit Donaville at the National Space Biomedical Research Institute on brain health. So what we did is we did a call throughout the nation, worked with a lot of great organizations like MIT, like Stanford, like Carnegie Mellon, and then all the top health accelerators. And we picked 35 digital health companies to come to Houston for the second day of the opening of the TMCX, and they got to pitch the member institutions of the TMC. The intention of this was, of course, to figure out how do we do successful collaborations between digital health companies and hospitals. So the conversation we've been having, and I'd like to invite you to join us throughout our session, is going to be focused on Texas Children's. Texas Children's was very engaged in the process, and we're actually extending that process to South by Southwest, where we're going to work with 3 other children's hospitals, Cincinnati Children's, Boston Children's, and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to do a similar event where we continue to progress the model of how we source digital health startups, how we get them into the hospitals, and then how we get them funded once they're into the hospitals. So with that, I'd like to throw it to James. Could you tell us a little bit from our experience with Energizing Health in Houston, what we've learned about how we work with digital health companies and hospitals?
Yeah, so we had 5 companies come and present. We initially went through a group of maybe 15 to 20, and we had our lead physician, Dr. Kushner, so we were focused on diabetes. And Dr. Kushner is the head of our diabetes clinic, and he had another 3 physicians that in essence offered to help him work through the company. We had calls beforehand to make sure that we understood their models and answered any questions. Then they came and presented to us actually on the morning of for 3-minute pitches each, where they went into greater depth than what the calls us established during the time. We ended up having 4 companies that were very similar. Population management and diabetes, you'd expect there to be some redundancy. All 4 said they could integrate with Epic, but none said they had. And so they all said that it was technically capable as part of their sales pitch, but when we pushed them, they had not begun the process, and we know how that's a difficult process. We identified the one that we thought had the best chance, both from a user interface perspective and also for their technical capability, and we've continued that discussion. And then in the general group, we saw, in general, I think it was out of Dr. Beckett's group, we saw one that we really liked that it helped pharmacy. And so we engaged in discussions both with that one as well as Ticket, the one that we thought had potential for diabetes population management. And so the goal was to try to work towards a pilot, but also we had to compare that to where Epic had been and where Epic's going. And so on one side you have an entrepreneurial gusto, and on the other side you have a company that we have put $200 million into in establishing Epic in our facilities. And so we need them to work together. And that is where, in essence, we found we ran into trouble. And so that's one of our major focuses in looking at a curation model, which is we want to encourage entrepreneurs to solve problems, but we also need them to work within an ever-growing system of systems that we have to manage as well.
Yeah, so one of the things we've learned, if you heard what Chris said earlier, like things that are real popular in digital health these days are wearables, and you get a lot of traction or a lot of, I guess, press around what's happening in the wearable market. But for really when you're looking at the financial model, the reimbursement models, where the money's at, it's really how do digital health startups work with hospitals, where the real money is at. And so what we found in the first year of doing Energizing Health was that there is this integration problem. When you get from the entrepreneur level into hospital culture, hospital bureaucracy, hospital integration with Epic, then there really starts to be problems. So James introduced me to Craig recently, and Craig's a troublemaker, guys. He gave us all the reasons, or all the ways that startups should be working with hospitals but aren't. So I'd like to let him take a few minutes and share with us his perspective of maybe how even some of these startups at Texas Children's missed the mark and maybe where they could do better.
Thank you. I have no idea about this troublemaker thing you're talking about, but I do disagree with a lot of what we actually just heard. So I guess that the troublemaker thing is accurate. So I'm essentially acting as the interim CMIO for Texas Children's now. And Texas Children's has put a few dollars into Epic. I agree with some of what we heard before, which was that the EHR market's kind of done. There are 2 big winners, Epic and Cerner, and there are these other people. And there are a few big other people players, but that's pretty much it. the mom and pop shops are kind of just going to sell out and then be replaced. And we're already seeing that happening. Siemens, I just called a mom and pop shop. Now owns their healthcare IT stuff. So that's where it's going. And so the reality is that all of my physicians, and we have 70 or 80 primary care pediatric clinics around the area, in addition to 2 hospitals, in addition to building another hospital. If it's not going to work in their workflow, it's a nice idea. And so when I've worked with, or when I hear, population health, that's great. And we've got this tool, and we're going to take your insurance information because we can't actually capture your discrete clinical information, and we're going to do all kinds of really great things with it. And we're going to identify your patients that need follow-up and that need extra attention. I think that's awesome. And so how are my doctors going to find out about that? Well, they'll go to the internet, and they'll log on to our website. Okay, we're done. We're done. We're done. And I've worked with some companies that have thought that, and good luck and God bless to them is what I say. Our doctors and nurses are not going to log into a website. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. And even if you say to me, well, we can make a button, we can put it on the top of the Epic screen or Cerner screen or Allscripts screen, yeah, they're not going to press it. So I'm not happy. I'm not proud. I went to medical school and math school. So I agree with you on that. Math school is important. They're not going to do it. And so I'm all about incorporating it into the workflow. If you're not going to understand how I spend my day, and again, Texas Children's Hospital is the largest children's hospital in the United States. We're in ranked number 4, and the 3 above us, you just heard their names, Cincinnati, Boston, and CHOP, and we're coming to get them. This is not the normal way, right? We're a huge organization, I totally acknowledge that. I used to practice pediatrics with one other doctor. That's going away. Those practices are going to get bought up, and they're going to be incorporated because they have a mom and pop EHR right now, and they're not going to be able to support it. And there's going to be all kinds of incentives and sticks to come at you if you're not using the software in the right way. So workflow is behind me. Workflow is king, and if you're not going to incorporate into my workflow, it's not going to work. So if you generate an awesome spreadsheet for me of all of my patients who are in an ACO who need help, that's great. From my CIO will have a heart attack now because now you've got a spreadsheet with a bunch of PHI on it, and that's going to get lost or left on a laptop that's going to get stolen in the parking lot at Rice University, and now we're going to have to disclose publicly on our website and call the federal government and tell them that we just lost 10,000 records. Great, thank you so much. It needs to work within my EHR, and it needs to be secured so that I can't take that stuff and the average doctor or nurse move it out. So that's my one plea. Again, we use Epic, the biggest EHR company. If you're interested in investing in it, I suggest you move to Madison, Wisconsin, and become an employee, because that's the only way you're going to invest into Epic. But everyone's going to be using Epic or Cerner or Allscripts or one of the other 4 or 5 that are going to be there. So everything I'm saying, I believe to be applicable to that. I'll go quickly so that other people can talk. Pay for performance, I totally agree. Pay for performance is here, so you got to help me with that. I may not want to see more patients, and I see a lot of people saying, well, we're going to make this more efficient so you can see more patients. Great, I don't get paid to see more patients. I get paid to see the right patients. Help me see the right patients. What does that mean? That's population health. How are you going to help me see the right patients? How am I going to reach out to them? Oh, well, we've got the software and it's great, you can run it, and then you just got to call them. Who's calling them? Well, we'll send them an email. Okay, well, what are they going to do when they get that email? Well, they're going to need to make an appointment. Well, how are they going to do that? Well, they need that, I guess that needs to work with your EHR again, right? Because everyone's EHR now is having reg and sketch. Your professional billing and hospital billing all put together. So if it's not going to work together, it's just not going to work. I think you've already heard team-based medicine is here. Physicians I used to be able to convince physicians not to worry because we're going to be collecting some information that you don't think is relevant, but we need it for medical use or we need it for some other quality metric. But don't worry, it's not going to affect you. Your nurse will collect that information. And they used to go, oh yeah, that's great. Now they're smart enough to know that if I'm taking time away from their nurse and their medical assistant, I'm taking time away from them. Because now it's taking longer for that patient to get into the room. physicians aren't buying it anymore, so I have to come up with new tricks to get them to do what I want them to do. Team-based medicine, help my MA, my nurse work better and faster. You're helping me. Thank you very much. Physicians are supportive of that. I mentioned actionable solutions. Giving me a list of patients is in no way helpful. That list needs to be, I need to be able to do something with that list. So it would be great if there were a tool, and there is in Cerner and Epic at least, where I can take all of those patients and send them a message through the patient portal, or put them on a list for a phone call if they don't have an account on the patient portal. And if they come in for something totally unrelated to the care that they need, I should be reminded at that time, right in front of that patient, that they need that care so I can get that done. And lastly, something that we've been talking, we kind of ourselves have been talking about is how patients judge their doctors and their hospitals. And it's generally about the amount of marble in the lobby, and it's about the amount of eye contact that their physician made. So if I were going to be creating a software company, that's the kind of stuff that I would think about. Relationship management actually matters. It's hard for patients to judge their physicians based on clinical accuracy, right? It's kind of easier for physicians to do it. I once had a patient in urgent care that I was moonlighting at ask me for the name of a doctor who was old as dirt, is what this patient said. I want a doctor who's old as dirt and who everyone loves, and I gave her a name. And then she said, all right, this is awesome, I'm going to follow up with him. He's a good doctor? And I said, no. I was being honest. No, but he is old as dirt and everyone loves him. But he's not someone that I would take my children to. But that's not what you asked me for. Patients can't judge. See, I am saying provocative things, aren't I? Patients can't judge that. So making it so that the doctor does give them a shout out on their birthday, or does remember that they went on vacation, that we were talking about that vacation 6 months ago, and now you're back. If I ask you how that vacation went, you're a great doctor. Again, you might not have done my hemoglobin A1C and done all of my screening tests, but you're a great doctor, and I'm never going to leave you. And in fact, we know studies have shown that are much more less likely to sue you if something bad happens, because you're a good guy and friend, and I'm sure you tried your best. Even though there might be a ton of malpractice lawyers saying that he didn't do anything right. So software that works to help me do those things while I'm doing my business, seeing patients, not seeing patients, is what's going to help me. And so that's it. It's easy, and I'll say more provocative or contrarian things.
Well, Craig, I'm curious.
In a minute.
So I run a startup, and I don't know how much we can make this analogous to some of the startups that dealt with Texas Children's. You know, how do I integrate this with Epic? I mean, it's real seamless and transparent, right? It's super easy to do. Yeah, of course.
So I think that it's an important point. You know, that how do you interact with physicians as a user base? How do you change behaviors or make your system work with behaviors that are not going to change, right? But there's another sort of end of that funnel, which I think is also important to think about. So when I got started in grad school, you know, a decade ago, the whole program that I was part of was all about from bench to bedside, right? So there was a direction to innovation. It went from the lab through a clinical trial, data generation, to the clinical use. So we went out to physicians. Here's what it does. Here's what it behaves like. They use it or they don't, depending on how good your marketing is and how good your data is. But there was a direction that was very linear. I think that today, you know, this issue of engaging physicians and engaging the whole clinical team, it's not just user acceptance. It's not just behavior. It's also how do you really get out of them, you know, what the needs are. And I think it's changed how companies are formed and how they're developed. And I think that there's on the investor side too, you know, this question of, you know, how do you really look at a team and technology, look at it not as starting from, you know, we got this cool new way of doing things, this cool new software
Solution.
but actually in the very beginning, you know, some of these questions you're gonna we now get hit with at the end.
Yeah, we did, that's part of the energizing health model, is we started with pain points from the hospitals, and we sourced companies based on pain points. And we had really good matchup success, but you know, to me there was a cultural clash once we brought those startups who aren't really used to, some of them aren't used to hospital culture or integration or all the things that Craig already mentioned.
Right.
There's this next challenge, so you got a great solution, you know, you've solved a real problem. But, you know, I'm finding already with we had 19 collaborations out of 35 companies that came, and it's real slow going with the hospitals. And they're kind of world-class folks, and it's not just like your mom and pop, from, Boise, Idaho, startup that had a good idea. And that was part of the issue was Epic integration. We had a clear call at Texas Children's to make sure that whatever happens, and we did vetting in advance, and we still stalled on how to get past that challenge. So how do we address that?
So I would say that you would need a client of Epic, and I'm just going to say Epic, but we're talking of Cerner, and I think Cerner may be slightly different, but I'm lumping, like saying Coke for soda. But Epic, you have to have a large client that says, I want to use this, and then you have to have that client advocate go to the programmers and say, I want to integrate this in. And then you get kind of a chicken or the egg situation, because we want to know that you can integrate, but you can't integrate until we help you integrate. And so from that perspective, the question is how can we work within ourselves to identify the right things with the curation model? So, it was frustrating to see 4 different companies present the same idea, 3 of which are going to fail, or at least 2, because they're not going to be the best out of the ones that present.
What are Epic's going to do in 2 years?
And that's the next thing, which is what is on Epic's radar, considering they have the capital and the expertise to gobble up the pain points in a way that integrates with their system more seamlessly than to buy them through acquisition. And so the question is, what space does Epic want to get into, and what space does Epic or Cerner or Allscripts acknowledge that it's better to be nimble and better to have an entrepreneur address that quickly as opposed to a 5-year strategic vision?
So Jim, for a lot of us who've been here and trying to figure out how to attract venture capital in Houston, it has been, how do we solve real problems? And so we've been working on a funnel for the next expression of energizing health, where we do better pain points, better vetting with VCs in advance, do a dog and pony show like we did at TMCX on, taking the digital health companies out. But then after we have ones that we like, we're thinking maybe we put them into a boot camp with the hospitals and the VCs, and keep doing that cultural exchange or the technology exchange in a way where there's deal flow at the end. There's placement between the startups and the hospitals that can be funded. And we think that's kind of the next step for what we've started with Energizing Health. Does that sound like something that you think might help startups? Or?
Sure, absolutely. And I think that what I've heard, and this is, I think anyone who's worked in the field for a while has heard this a number of times, so often what we see is with startups, a solution that was developed in partnership with a hospital to serve a need that was very clear for that particular institution. When you try to jump out and make that more broadly accessible, go into other environments that can be really challenging. So I think that the real assets that we have here in the medical center, we've got a number of different types of hospitals in very close proximity. So the chance that you can collaborate with multiple hospitals at the same time from the very beginning is much higher versus being somewhere where you get on a plane or drive 3 hours to that other type of institution.
Absolutely. I actually think out of the event at TMC, we kind of stumbled onto this next collaboration with these children's hospitals, which was so dynamic. We had this cohort of hospitals that had some shared needs, and so it's been really kind of neat what actually has started out of the TMC, just because there's been an increase in the dialogue in Houston. How do we all collaborate together? How do we make innovation happen? How do we attract venture capital to town? So, are there startups in the room that have any questions? I think this is a great panel. I only see 1 or 2. Okay, there's 3 hands up, so go ahead. You're the boss.
Well,
It's your house.
I wanted to start with the whole Epic integration because, this question is going to be directed to Jim and Craig and James. So from the hospital provider side, you absolutely can broker a relationship between your startup company or the early stage company and Epic. So how do you go about doing that? And Jim, what is there a role that you see the TMCX having in brokering the relationships between EMRs like Epic and the accelerator companies? Great.
So I was an employee of Epic, and I've been a customer now of Epic and a customer of Cerner, and I think the big thing is relationships and calling up, saying, hey, we have this need, and we know that we're just like every other hospital that you have, every other customer. You're not meeting this need, and here are the reasons why. And we want to work with these folks, and we need you to play nicely with them. So if you have a relationship, some hospitals have better relationships with their vendors than others, so that's certainly worthwhile, right? If your CEO or CIO hasn't been to Madison or Kansas City or Chicago to visit their corporate headquarters, that's a potential problem. Because now you might just be a customer and you're not an innovator or a partner. So that's one thing that I think is absolutely worthwhile. Another thing to understand is, and another reason for those constant trips back to wherever your vendor lives, where are they going? What are they doing? We've got this problem and we need to solve this. Yeah, that was solved last year in our upgrade that you didn't take. So thanks, but good luck. Yeah, we're not doing that. And in fact, we've got other customers already live on that functionality. So that's a non-starter. What I think somewhere in between there, we've seen a couple people who kind of propose things. Hey, we've got this solution that we think can get you 80% of the way with minimal work with your vendor now, which is not, hey Craig, it's not exactly in the workflow, but it's not far off. And we call the vendor up and they're like, oh yeah, we're working on that for our release after the next release, and you're about a year after that, so you'll get that from us in 3 or 4 years. You know what, it's worth probably a lot of money for me to invest and get that thing to work 6 months from now. And even though I know that I'm going to have to pull it out in 3 or 4 or 5 years, I'll still go for it if you're solving a major problem for me. I've seen that. I saw a startup that automates the refill process. I mean, I'm sure there's about 100 of those. That really, hey, you're on a chronic med. If you meet these 5 criteria, we'll get that. You don't even have to look at it. The nurse doesn't have to look at it. Just send it right off. That's brilliant. And Epic is going to be doing that soon. So I would still invest in something. I would still be very interested in that solution and that software, even though I know that it's coming. So it's really, you probably never heard this. It's all about the relationship. It's probably news to most of you.
Okay, I saw a hand in the back.
Well, can I
Yeah, of course.
answer the second part of Kim's question? So, how's the TMC going to play into this situation? So I think that one of the things we heard from this panel, there are some really interesting, important insights, flowing through the medical center. And what we've seen, just with the accelerator that we had a class in this week, a ton of energy, a ton of innovative interest and real appetite to go engage with these things. And I think one of the issues that we can help solve is how do you get the insights flowing around and the energy to actually intersect, at a common point. And so we want to be part of the answer to that. Not really the whole answer, but we'll help facilitate those interactions so that the real insights that these companies need to be successful are actually getting into their process at the beginning, not the end. And that's, I think, job. The first thing that we're going to do is just be the rallying point to help create those connections. I think as we go forward, and as we start to collect experiential knowledge ourselves, we can actually start to match more intelligently technologies to problems that we've seen in the medical center. I think that's probably step 2 of the evolution.
I was just going to respond to some of the comments on the slide that's behind that Craig walked through. I thought it was really helpful to hear. But I think there's also great opportunity for so many startups because not all hospital environments are this box solution. And I think that going back to what Chris McCord said, timing is great because there's still a lot of great hospital systems that are not perfectly set up in this situation where you might have to integrate with a tool like Epic. And that the decentralization component is really important as well. When you're working with other levels of care and care settings, there's a great opportunity for things that have to come out of certain systems to work with other systems down the line. And it can't all work perfectly in a box like Epic because it's not a solution that they have. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, despite certainly needing to integrate with these larger systems if your tool operates solely within that particular care setting.
So I'd actually like to add that I don't think we pretend to be perfect, or Epic does either. I think we use like 20, anywhere between 20 to 80% of it. There's a good portion of Epic that we have never turned on. And then there are a couple of modules that Epic has that our physicians have rejected, that they just don't believe that work effectively right now. So we're not using. So they're even though it may be on the radar, they may not have addressed it may not be a high priority in their system. At which time, a good use case with adaptability may involve kind of growth in that particular area. So there is opportunity, it's a great time. And the fact that it is still so, a number of different systems, there's opportunity with all of those systems, and it's almost exponential.
Let's take one or two more questions. Let's have
Yeah, I have one question about the two grain, particularly in grain and James maybe. So, and the core concept that you were talking about it exactly, the workflow need to satisfy the users, end users, which is the physicians and the nurses. So that makes perfect sense because they are behind the scene, of course, all the data because they are extremely busy at the right point, at the right information should be there. But when you are talking about patient-centric care, like the patient is away at a home, Cerners or any of those guys, they are purely made for the back end, for the behind the scene activities. They have never meant for the patient facing. So most